Raise your hand if you have a graveyard. Not a real one. I mean the kind that lives in your spare room, your closet, your laptop desktop. There's a guitar in the corner collecting dust, a Duolingo streak you abandoned sometime around 2021, a Udemy course 37% complete that haunts you every time you open your browser, and every time you walk past these things, you feel it. That little sting, that tiny voice. Why can't you just finish anything? Society has some very creative names for people like us. Flaky, unfocused, a quitter. And of course the classic insult disguised as a proverb, jack of all trades, master of none. What they never tell you is that the full quote is, jack of all trades, master of none, though oftentimes better than master of one. They cut off the part that was actually a compliment. Typical. But here's what I want to tell you today, and I want you to really hear this. You are not broken. You are not lazy. You are not the problem. Your strategy is the problem, and strategy can be fixed. Let me paint you a picture. You discover something new. Let's say it's photography. You buy a camera, maybe you spent a little more than your partner would approve of, and suddenly the world looks different. You're framing shots at the grocery store. You're thinking about golden hour light at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. You consume tutorials like it's oxygen. You're on fire. Your brain feels like it's been plugged into a wall socket. Everything is exciting. Everything is clicking, and you think, this is it. This is the one. I found my thing. And then, 3 weeks later, the camera is on the shelf. The tutorials are paused at 42%. And you're watching YouTube videos about learning the cello. Sound familiar? Here's what actually happened, and it has nothing to do with your personality. Cognitive scientists have a term for what you're experiencing. They call it the knowledge instinct. Your brain's deep, primal drive to reduce uncertainty, to understand things, to figure stuff out. And your version of this instinct, it's strong. But here's the catch. Your brain is wired to care less about having the knowledge and more about the speed of getting it. Think about it. When you started photography, every single day you went from knowing nothing to knowing something. The learning curve was steep, the gains were fast, and your brain was basically doing backflips. Neuroscientists call this a reward prediction error response. When reality beats your expectations, your brain floods with dopamine. It's intoxicating. It feels like falling in love that first 2 weeks when everything about a person seems perfect and they haven't yet left their socks on the bathroom floor. Scientists call this the Novice High, and like all highs, it ends. At some point, you get it. You understand the fundamentals. The novelty drops. The learning slows down. You hit the plateau. And for brains wired like yours, high novelty-seeking, highly reward-sensitive, the plateau doesn't just feel boring. It feels like the dopamine disappeared overnight. One day you're passionate. The next day you're forcing yourself to practice scales and wondering if maybe pottery was your real calling all along. This is the fork in the road. A master pushes through the plateau because they're hunting for a deeper pattern. They know the good stuff is on the other side. A dabbler quits here and then calls themselves lazy. But let me be precise about something because this is important. Laziness is a refusal to act. You are not refusing to act. You are running out of fuel. There's a difference, a big one. You're not a quitter. You're experiencing dopamine withdrawal. Your brain is doing what brains do. The problem isn't your character, it's that nobody taught you what to do when the high wears off. Okay, I have to be real with you for a second. Everything I just said is true, but I also need to say this. There's a version of quitting that is not dopamine withdrawal. There's a version where something got slightly hard, one confusing chapter, one bad practice session, one moment where your ego took a hit, and you decided you probably weren't meant for this anyway. That version? That's fear wearing the costume of, it's just not for me. And the reason that fear wins is because a specific muscle in your brain has never been trained. You've probably heard willpower talked about like it's either in your DNA or it isn't. You either have grit or you don't. That's not what neuroscience says. Neuroscience says tenacity is physical. There's a region of your brain called the Anterior Midcingulate Cortex, the aMCC. Think of it as your willpower muscle, literally. It's a physical structure that gets stronger the more you use it and weaker when you don't. Here's how it works. The aMCC activates when you do something you don't want to do. If you love the task, it sleeps. If you hate it and do it anyway, it fires. And every time it fires, it grows. Now here's where it gets real. Every time you felt bored in the middle of learning something and quit, you put the weight down. Every time frustration showed up and you moved to something new, you skipped leg day. Which means right now your aMCC might be so undertrained that a single difficult chapter in a book is enough to trigger a time to start a podcast response. It's not weakness, it's atrophy, and atrophy can be fixed. Here's what not to do. Do not sit down and try to force yourself into a 4-hour deep work session just because some guy on YouTube said successful people wake up at 5 a.m. and grind. That's the equivalent of walking into a gym having never exercised and trying to deadlift 300 pounds. You'll injure yourself, and you'll never go back. Instead, the 15% push. Next time you're practicing your hobby, and that familiar urge hits the one that says, maybe I should take a break, check Instagram, research a different hobby entirely. Don't immediately quit, but also don't try to be a hero. Just push 15% further. If you plan to read 10 pages and you want to stop at page 3, read to page 4. Then stop. That's it. That one extra page, that's the rep. That's how the muscle grows. Small, mechanical, boring, and over months transformative. Before I move on, I have to make space for something important. If you have ADHD, your dopamine system and executive function operate differently. Telling you to just push through using willpower alone can lead to burnout, shame spirals, and more abandoned hobbies. For ADHD brains, you don't just need internal grit, you need external scaffolding. Break the project into tiny, visible steps so your brain can see progress. Use timers so tasks don't feel endless. Work alongside someone to borrow their focus. Yes, this is a real technique called body doubling. Add artificial rewards to replace the dopamine the task isn't providing. The aMCC strategy still matters, but you need tools to support it, not just pressure to push harder. If you suspect ADHD as part of your picture, please treat this gently and get support. You are not lazy. Your brain runs on different software. There's one last thing I want to address. Even if you do the 15% push, even if you're training your aMCC, the plateau will still feel unbearable if you don't deal with this. Boredom intolerance. We live in a world of weaponized stimulation. TikTok was literally engineered by rooms full of psychologists to be more engaging than human connection. Compared to that, practicing guitar scales sounds like watching paint dry in slow motion. Your brain's baseline for stimulation has been raised so high that quiet, meaningful work registers as suffering. This needs a dopamine reset, not forever, not a monk lifestyle, just a practice of stimulus control during your work sessions. Phone in another room, no background music, just you and the work. And when boredom shows up don't treat it as a signal to quit. Boredom is actually your brain shifting gears from consumption to creation. It's the necessary discomfort before the deeper focus kicks in. It's the engine warming up. Let it warm up. Here's what I want to propose. Pick one interest. Just one. It doesn't have to be your career. It doesn't have to be profitable. It just has to be real. And commit to 6 months, not to become a world expert, not to monetize it, just to experience what happens when you push past the plateau. When you feel the dopamine drop and do the work anyway. When your aMCC starts to grow. Because here's what happens on the other side of that. You don't just get better at the skill, you get a new identity. You stop being someone who starts things and start being someone who builds things. The label of Dabbler was never permanent. It was just a phase. It was you, before you knew the strategy. You're not a quitter with a graveyard. You're a polymath in training. Now go dust off that guitar.